sentences. Don't get complex about it. Hi, I'm Megan from Lexicool Tuition, and in this video I will be focusing upon sentences. So firstly, what is a sentence? So it may seem really obvious because we use sentences every day, but actually when we have to define it, it can be a little bit more tricky. So a sentence requires a subject, a verb, and a main clause. So what is the subject? The subject is the person or the place or the thing that is doing something. So here are some examples of the subject in a sentence. Great, okay, so I said that we needed a subject in our sentence. We also need a verb. So a verb is a doing word. So a sentence must have a verb, an action, to make it a sentence. So here again are some examples, this time highlighting the verbs being used. Thirdly, I said that a sentence had to have at least one main clause. So a main clause is a complete thought, an idea that makes sense by itself. It can stand alone. So if you've ever had that moment where you're talking to someone, or maybe you're the person doing it, and they just go off on a tangent and they don't complete their whole thought, their whole idea, it's really frustrating. So I'm just going to go and get a what? Okay, so that wouldn't be an entire thought. That's not a sentence. So it has to be a complete thought, also known as a main or independent clause. It's the same thing and it can stand alone. So in these examples are underlined the complete thoughts, so the independent or main clause. Independent or main is exactly the same thing. So now we know what a sentence is, let's look at the three main types of sentences. So firstly, the simple sentence. Now you may be thinking, oh, simple, okay, that's just a really short sentence. That's a common misconception. Actually, you can have some really long, simple sentences. But what makes it a simple sentence is the fact that it has one main clause. Of course, it has a subject and a verb, like we said, a sentence must have subject and a verb, but it only has one main clause. And also, to make it a sentence, it must have a capital letter and a full stop. Or, instead of a full stop, you can have a question mark or an exclamation mark to finish that sentence. So just to say, a simple sentence is a sentence with one main clause. So here are some examples of simple sentences. So secondly then, compound sentences. So I always remember these sentences from my science lessons if we think about the word compound. So this type of sentence has two main clauses and it's joined with a coordinating conjunction. So a way to remember this is if you remove the conjunction in the middle, would these two clauses stand alone as simple sentences? So here are some examples of some compound sentences. Lastly, complex sentences. Now, as the name suggests, it can be a little bit more confusing. So just like a simple and a compound sentence, complex sentences must have a main clause. However, they can also have another type of clause called a subordinate clause, also known as a dependent clause. Now, this other type of clause basically is the type that I referred to where they go off on a tangent, where it doesn't make sense on its own. So this dependent clause can only be in a sentence providing it is linked with a main clause. So you can never have a subordinate clause on its own. It has to be joined with a main clause, and that is what we refer to as a complex sentence. So the easy way to remember is the only type of sentence that has a dependent or subordinate clause is the complex sentence. So here are some examples of complex sentences. So to sum up, in this video, we looked at sentences. So to make a sentence, it must have a verb, a subject, and a main clause. And also it must have a capital letter to start and some form of punctuation to end, so it has to be a full stop, an exclamation mark, or a question mark. Simple sentences entail this calibre, but they only have one main clause, whereas a compound sentence has two main clauses joined with a conjunction, a coordinating conjunction. And then lastly, a complex sentence is a main or independent clause along with a subordinate clause. So if you enjoyed this video or found it useful, please subscribe. If you would like to make a request on future videos, please feel free to email me or contact me via my website, which is at the top there, www.lexicooltuition.com.